D-Day was one of the most momentous days in human history, a day that marked the beginning of the end of Nazi domination in Europe. It happened on June 6, 1944, when the Allied forces launched a massive invasion on the beaches of Normandy in northern France. The invasion was the culmination of years of planning, coordination, and sacrifice. It was called Operation Overlord, and it was not just a battle, but a monumental effort involving hundreds of thousands of soldiers, sailors, pilots, and support personnel from several nations working together toward one goal: to free Europe from Hitler's grip. By 1944, Nazi Germany had occupied most of Western Europe for several years. France had fallen early in the war, and despite several attempts, the Allies had not been able to create a foothold on the continent. The Soviet Union was fighting fiercely on the Eastern Front, but the Western Allies knew that a major invasion of Western Europe was essential to divide German attention and open a second front. Planning for such an invasion had been underway since 1943. It required not only military strength, but also immense secrecy and deception to prevent the Germans from discovering where and when it would take place. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, an American officer, was chosen as the supreme commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force. He had the enormous task of coordinating the efforts of multiple countries, primarily the United States, Great Britain, and Canada, but also soldiers from other Allied nations such as France, Poland, Norway, and Australia. Eisenhower's leadership was crucial, as he needed to balance political pressures, logistical challenges, and the realities of combat. The success or failure of the invasion rested largely on his shoulders. The Allies chose Normandy, a region on the northern coast of France, as the site for their invasion. It wasn't the most obvious choice. Many expected the attack to come at Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point between England and France. That's exactly what the Germans thought too, and it was what the Allies wanted them to think. To reinforce this illusion, they created a massive deception plan known as Operation Bodyguard. Fake armies were established in southeastern England, inflatable tanks were placed in open fields, and radio transmissions were deliberately sent to confuse German intelligence. Even a well-known Allied general, George S. Patton, was assigned to command a fake army group to make the deception more convincing. Meanwhile, as the invasion date approached, every detail was carefully planned. The operation would begin with airborne assaults by paratroopers, who would be dropped behind enemy lines during the night to capture bridges, roads, and key positions to prevent the Germans from quickly sending reinforcements to the beaches. Then, as dawn broke, an armada of ships would bring tens of thousands of troops to storm the beaches. Naval ships and aircraft would provide cover, bombarding German defences and clearing the way for the landings. On the night of June 5, 1944, the weather was uncertain. Heavy winds and rough seas threatened to delay the invasion. Eisenhower had already postponed it once due to poor conditions, and now he had to make a fateful decision. After consulting with his weather experts, he decided that there would be a brief break in the storm on June 6. It was a risky choice, but delaying further could have ruined months of preparation and jeopardized the entire mission. Eisenhower made his decision and gave the order to proceed. As night fell, the invasion began. Around midnight, thousands of paratroopers from the American 82nd and 101 Stone's airborne divisions and the British 6th Airborne Division were dropped across Normandy. Many were scattered off target due to high winds and heavy German fire, landing miles away from their intended zones. Some drowned in flooded fields, while others found themselves isolated, surrounded by enemy forces. Yet, despite the chaos, small groups of paratroopers managed to carry out vital missions, blowing up bridges, cutting communications, and capturing key crossroads. Their courage and improvisation helped to confuse the Germans and disrupt their defences. As dawn approached, the horizon over the English Channel began to fill with ships, thousands of them. It was the largest amphibious invasion fleet ever assembled, with over 5,000 vessels carrying more than 150,000 men. The sheer scale of it was almost unimaginable. The German soldiers stationed along the coast could see the dark outlines of the fleet emerging from the mist, and they knew something extraordinary was happening. At around 6:30 in the morning, the first landing craft began to approach the beaches. The invasion zone was divided into 5 main sectors. The Americans would land at Utah and Omaha beaches, the British at Gold and Sword, and the Canadians at Juno. Each beach had its own challenges: tides, cliffs, strong currents, and heavily fortified positions. The German defences, part of what was called the Atlantic Wall, included bunkers, machine gun nests, artillery batteries, mines, and obstacles designed to tear apart landing craft. At Utah Beach, the landings went relatively well. Strong currents had pushed the American troops slightly off course, but in doing so, they actually landed in a less defended area. By mid-morning, they had secured their objectives and began moving inland. Omaha Beach, however, was a different story. The Americans who landed there faced some of the most brutal fighting of the entire invasion. German machine guns fired relentlessly from cliffs overlooking the beach. Many landing craft were destroyed before they even reached the shore. Those who made it had to wade through waist-deep water, carrying heavy packs under constant fire. The beach was littered with obstacles and bodies. For several terrifying hours, it seemed as though the Omaha landing might fail completely. But slowly, through courage and determination, small groups of soldiers began to break through the German defences. They climbed the bluffs, attacked bunkers, and opened paths for reinforcements. By the end of the day, Omaha was in Allied hands, though at a terrible cost. Thousands of men lay dead or wounded. Meanwhile, British and Canadian forces were fighting their own fierce battles at Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches. They faced tough German resistance, but with the help of specialized armored vehicles, some designed to clear mines, others to bridge gaps or destroy obstacles, they managed to push inland. By nightfall, all 5 beaches were secured, though the front lines were still fragile and the situation remained dangerous. The cost of D-Day was enormous. On that single day, over 4,000 Allied soldiers were killed, with many thousands more wounded or missing. German casualties were also heavy, and hundreds of French civilians lost their lives as their towns and villages became battlefields. Yet, despite the terrible losses, the invasion was a success. The Allies had established a foothold in France, and from that moment on, the tide of the war in Europe began to turn. In the days and weeks that followed, more troops, vehicles, and supplies poured into Normandy. The fighting remained intense, especially around towns like Caen and Saint-Lô, where the Germans mounted strong counterattacks. The Allies advanced slowly, battling through hedgerows and fortified villages, but their superior numbers and control of the skies gradually gave them the advantage. By late August, Paris was liberated, and within months, Allied forces were pushing toward Germany itself. D-Day was not just a military victory, it was a triumph of human courage, unity, and determination. Soldiers from different nations' languages and backgrounds fought side by side, risking everything for the hope of a free Europe. The invasion required extraordinary bravery from those who landed on the beaches, flew in the skies, or served aboard ships in the stormy waters. Many never returned home, but their sacrifice changed the course of history. Today, D-Day is remembered as one of the greatest achievements of the Allied forces during World War II. It symbolizes the moment when hope began to triumph over tyranny. The beaches of Normandy are now peaceful, dotted with memorials and cemeteries where the fallen lie buried. Visitors from around the world come to honor their memory and reflect on the immense cost of freedom. When we think of D-Day, we think not only of the military strategy and heroism, but also of the human spirit that made it possible. The men who fought there faced unimaginable fear, yet they pressed forward because they believed in something larger than themselves. The belief that oppression must be defeated, that liberty was worth dying for, and that the future of the world depended on their courage. The legacy of D-Day continues to remind us of the power of cooperation and sacrifice in the face of evil. It stands as a lesson that freedom is never free, and that even in the darkest of times, ordinary people can rise to achieve extraordinary things.